Look, putting aside all the records that the Eras Tour has shattered and all the different conversations that Taylor Swift has started in the past year or so, now that the Eras Tour has come to Canada, I wanted to ask one question. How does Taylor Swift change a city when she shows up? For Group Chats here, we got a lot to get into. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion.
We have taken the Eras Tour all over the world. You know, we went to Asia, we went to Australia. We spent all summer in Europe, swung back through America, and then we thought, you know what? If we're gonna bring the Eras Tour to a close, which we are, in 9 shows, we're like, I was thinking, you know, I really want to spend those last shows with the most generous, encouraging, welcoming, passionate, excitable fans. So we came to see you in Toronto.
Okay, she's here. After more than a year of speculating and planning and bracelet making, the Eras Tour has come to Canada. We're starting with Toronto, and then it's going to go to Vancouver. And I think you can feel it in a lot of different ways, right? I'm not just talking about the extra trains or the renamed streets or the incredibly high prices for just about everything from like food to hotels. I'm talking about like the dynamics between kids at schools, the haves and the have-nots, the people who have been lining up for 2 days before the first show just to buy the merch or the cultural spin-offs or the sing-alongs or the drag shows or the pop-ups. The scale of what's happening right now is absolutely staggering. More than 500,000 people are showing up to see her 6 sold-out shows in Toronto because it is the second last stop in the Eras Tour before she heads to Vancouver. Eras has smashed every single record to become the highest grossing tour of all time. So today, I just wanted to ask this tiny little question, which is, how does Taylor Swift change a city when she shows up? Nico Stratus and Jackson Weaver are back with us. And for the first time, we got Jasmeet Sidhu and Mark Colley here with us. I'm excited that you're all here. Nico and Mark and Jasmeet and Jackson, welcome to the show, everybody. How's it going?
Hi.
Good. Wow.
Hi.
Yeah, we got a lot of us. We got a lot to get into. There's a lot of us, and we got a lot to get into. Listen, Jackson, you and I were both at the concert. We both had media tickets. You were sitting one section over from me. I ran into you after the show, and you were maybe a skeptic going in, and the vibe shifted by the end of the show. Talk about it. What's your reaction?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was saying this before we started, but I stole the term Swift agnostic from Nico. But coming out, I don't know if I'm a convert, but I'm at least, you know, like standing outside the church, like looking through the windows, maybe you could say. I mean, like she did the show that like we know, like it's been going on since March of last year. We saw it on Disney Plus. There's like the 45 songs. There's like the one acoustic section of random things. But she hit all the heights. She got, I think the most interesting thing about actually being there is you see fans, Elamin included, and their kids dressed to the nines. This is like Halloween if Halloween was better attended. And there's this pyrotechnics, there's amazing dancing, and then there's, oh my gosh, for Canada at least, the Canadian fan service, the sorry about it section, the Canada's the best, I love Canada jokes. So I mean, like, the show is what you would expect with a Canadian tinge, and I mean, being in person, I'll admit it, it's a bit more than you would expect.
Well, this is the thing we were talking about yesterday, Jackson. I'll get to everybody in just a moment, but I'm drilling on Jackson because I do think that he was trying to hold it on a bit of a distance yesterday. But this is the thing that we talked about yesterday after the show, which is to say that like there is all the conversation that Taylor Swift invites outside of the stadium, and then there is the show inside the stadium. And the show inside the stadium is a pretty intimate thing that is there for the fans specifically. And then there's like all the madness that goes on outside of it. Is Taylor Swift responsible for the fall of Rome? I don't know. People sort of like try to like tag all these things on her that feel like they don't make any sense to me, but especially don't make any sense immediately after the show when you're like, oh, this is a very good pop star designing a very good pop show for her fans specifically. Am I off, you know, in terms of reading those two different distances there?
No, maybe I'll try and shoehorn my haterade in later, but I need to give credit where credit's due. Yeah, like she's a great singer, not the best in the world. She's a good dancer, again, not the best in the world. But I think of pop stars around right now, she is the best at making a stadium of 50,000 people feel like a basement of 50 people.
Hmm.
Like she seems so happy that you're there. And there's this weird sort of familiarity. I don't know if weird's the right word, but there is a familiarity that she can really bring to the stadium. And like everyone there, like there's like a 7-year-old next to me crying, and then the other side a 70-year-old crying. And I think they both feel just as close to Taylor. So again, I'm gonna flip on the haterade switch a little further on, but I gotta say, yeah, she does something that no one else can do. She's created monoculture in a time that shouldn't really be possible to do anymore.
I gotta say, if you keep your haterade switch off, I would not mind it at all. Mark, we've covered the vibes, I think, in the stadium. Let's get into a bit of the math. For the month of Toronto, your job is to be the Taylor Swift reporter for the city. Do you want to talk about what that means? Like, what are the numbers that you're looking at? What is the magnitude of this thing?
Yeah, I mean it that line from The Lion King, like everything the light touches is our kingdom. That's kind of Taylor Swift right now in Toronto. It is anything and everything. It's transit, it's businesses, it's the economy, it's all the fans who are coming down, it's sidewalks, it's the Gardiner Expressway. It is everything the light touches in this city. But the number, I mean, you mentioned the number off the top that I think is the number that defines this, and it's 500,000 visitors to the downtown core. To put that into a little bit of a perspective, this city is said is expecting about 300,000 visitors for the World Cup in 2026. And they're putting the number at Taylor Swift at 500,000. So that's sort of the magnitude of this event. Some of the other numbers, like the economy number that we're all hearing, is $282 million expected to be added to the Toronto economy. So there is this, I think the vibes part of it is perhaps more important than the numbers, because seeing this in action on the street, I mean, I wasn't in the Rogers Center last night, but on the street, you can see all these things playing out. But yeah, some of those numbers are mind-boggling, certainly.
Nico, what I heard Mark say there is if FIFA World Cup, the most popular world sporting event in the world, tries really hard, they can maybe one day be as popular as Taylor Swift. That's the thing that I just took away from what Mark just said. I mean, I'm interested in your take on this because you are not a huge fan of Taylor Swift. Like you have the reasonable relationship in terms of fandom with Taylor Swift, which is to say, hey, this artist is pretty good, but do we need to be making all of this noise about this artist? I think there are a lot of cynics out there who can maybe sort of still believe that this is the most impressive marketing achievement in the history of music. When you digest the numbers that Mark just laid out, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like you say, I'm happy to be here as the official haterade switch. More than that, thank you. I mean, it takes a village to hate on a massively wealthy white woman.
My God.
But, like you say, so much of this is undeniable, right? Like the sheer star power of her is undeniable. And it's not for nothing, like so many of these things, they're big and they're popular, but when you look at it, you're like, well, there's nothing there. And I think there's a lot there with Taylor Swift. Like that part of it is undeniable. There's a reason why people get drawn into her orbit and, they get dunked in the water and they emerge as Swifties or whatever. We're using a lot of church analogies today, which as a person who is actually agnostic in real life is very fun for me. But you know what I mean? Like I can see all these things, and it is a really difficult time to be a critic of her because it is a fine line, right? Because I read critique of her that it seems to be really steeped in, a lot of misogyny and a lot of like, well, music was better 30 years ago. Like I've read things that reference Huey Lewis and the News. And look, I like Huey Lewis and the News, but if ever I'm listening to Taylor Swift, I'm like, what other band I'm thinking of right now?
You're a bit off.
It's the soundtrack to Back to the Future Part 1 from 1982. So it is a fine balance. And I think the numbers are undeniable. And I think what we're going to look back on is like, well, what other things changed for good and for bad? And this is the hard thing with this right now is, if you're reporting on it, you sort of have to be reporting on it from a positive angle. It is really, really hard to find that way in of like, well, let's look at the other things here. Let's look at the impact from other angles. What is the funneling of resources to her do for cultural industries within Toronto that are also trying to get off the ground or stay afloat in an era where hundreds of thousands of dollars are going to change street signs in the name of one person, a thing we've never done for anybody else. I could not buy a Bruce Springsteen street sign even though he was here for 2 nights. So these are all questions I'm wondering of, like, how do we approach this conversation in good faith and try to balance both things in hand, like my cynical nature, but also the undeniable draw of somebody like this.
I want to say, like, as quickly, because like I wrote this story a little while ago with Nico as a voice in it, and it was just talking about the effect of Taylor Swift. The reaction I got was anger of people. Why are we giving so much attention to it? I think that's warranted in a little bit, in a few ways.
Okay, the haterade switch. I can see it switching on. I want to come back to that. There is room for everybody in this show. That is fine. This is welcome. But I actually do want to turn to the OG fan in the room. Jasmeet, listen, you've been a fan since 2008. You started photographing her in 2015. You've been to a bunch of different cities just photographing this very specific tour. When you look at Toronto right now, have you seen anything like what's happening in Toronto right now?
Well, Toronto is definitely losing its mind, I have to say.
Okay,
and
right.
more than that, I've never seen every single business crack their backs trying to make Taylor Swift lyrical puns in all their advertisements. But it's working, hotels.com, shout out to you. You've like plastered that little pathway to CN Tower.
Yeah.
To put it into perspective, yes, Toronto is losing its mind, but there have been other cities on this tour that have equally lost its mind, and I'll give you a few examples. When she went to Rio de Janeiro, the Rio projected a Taylor Swift T-shirt on the Christ the Redeemer, another religious reference.
Yes, yeah.
Toronto's having 6 shows. Singapore also had 6 shows, and Singapore was the only stop in Southeast Asia. So there you had an entire geographical region of like Thailand and the Philippines and Malaysia going wild over Taylor Swift. And New Orleans was actually the first one that did the gigantic wraparound friendship bracelet around the stadium. So I think the Rogers Center took its cues from there. So those are just some examples of whenever Taylor Swift comes to a city. I would say, particularly in the last third of the tour, cities have really gone out of their way to really maximize the tourist dollars and the visitors that are coming in to make these visitors, and to be quite frank, many female visitors feel very welcome. We talk about the World Cup. We never talk about the fact that we need to make these people feel welcome, in a different way. The Taylor Swift is a very young audience. It's a very female audience. And when I hear people who turn on the Taylor Swift haterade, what I say to them is like, we never question other culturally dominant things that are male-centered and question why they're so popular. Like, we have men playing ball games, but it's a multi-million-dollar industry that takes up so much cultural space. And we never question why that's the center of so much of culture. But when we have a very female-centered thing, making content for a majority female audience, the think pieces are like beyond, in my opinion. And I think we should just let a happy thing happen in the city of Toronto. It happens to be for a majority of female fans. And I think that's sort of the differentiator here that's causing all the think pieces. And just enjoy it.
I will say though, like, the coverage is disproportionate, right? Like you see a couple of stories usually when the Super Bowl is, chosen in a city. And those stories kind of like pale in comparison to the coverage of the Super Bowl. But there's something kind of different happens, Mark, when Taylor Swift goes to town. And this is not just a Toronto specific thing. This is sort of like everywhere that she goes. And what I like about what Jasmeet laid out there is that all of the things that Toronto is doing for Taylor Swift, that appears to be a regular Tuesday. Like, that's just like any city that she goes to, they go, how do we bend over backwards to make sure that the fans have a nice time, but also like we maximize on this opportunity? And it is an opportunity. Like, every city seems to see it as some sort of economic opportunity. So while it's impossible, I think, to like describe the scale and the scope of the changes that the city's making, what are some of the remarkable and surprising things that you're seeing, Mark? Because I got to tell you, I've never gotten home faster from a show than last night after seeing the show. And it turns out you could actually just run extra trains when there's a lot of people downtown. That's just a thing a city can do when they decide that that's a thing that a city wants to do.
Yeah, I feel like Toronto sometimes is very much a not fun city to live in. But when we want to, we can do things, and we can make this city run better for the people living in it. Transit, TTC has said they're spending between $1 million and $1.2 million over the course of Taylor's stays to increase their service. Metrolinx has increased their service on the GO train and GO buses. I mean, you just need to walk down the street to see what this city is doing for Taylor. Like, there are QR codes plastered on the sidewalk all over downtown, telling people to get into their Toronto era and go to the Tourism Toronto board and see what they can do while they're in their city. There's a TO Poets Department QR code that is plastered all over sidewalks. And you walk past any bar in the downtown core yesterday, and they are playing Taylor Swift music. And then, of course, not to say every single billboard in this city is plastered with the Eras Tour is here, presented by Rogers. So yeah, it is unavoidable. This city has done so much to get itself ready, and I do think the perspective of this is not something that's necessarily unique to Toronto is important, but it does feel strange. It feels bizarre. Like, I've been covering this for a few weeks, and I don't think I don't understand why. I guess I don't understand.
I guess I could provide a little context to that. I mean, for historical context, you could get her last tour, 2018 Reputation. You can get floor tickets for $80 from Ticketmaster a few days, and she was playing at the Rogers Centre. I went back and checked my 1989 tickets. I bought those for $60. So you have to ask the question: what happened at the Rogers Centre? What happened between 2018 and 2024? A couple things happened. One, she had a tour plan for 2020, got canceled because of COVID. So then you had, an entire industry that just shut down. So you had this pent up demand of her not being on tour for 5 years.
And she put out 5 albums in that period of time. I mean, she put out a whole bunch of records.
She released 5 albums, which included her Taylor's version. So it was an invitation for fans who may have dropped off later in the fandom to revisit and re-enter the fandom when she released, Fearless again and Speak Now again and Red again. So you had the old fans being invited to come back into the circle.
But these tickets are going for way more, Jasmeet. I mean, we're talking about starting in the mid-hundreds.
I would say the third prong to that is millennial women like myself are now having children. They want to invite their children into the thing that they enjoyed when they were teenagers and in their 20s. And so when you put all those 3 factors together on top of a 5-year tour hiatus, you just have this pent-up demand and a multi-generational pent-up demand that she's created.
I want to talk. The haters have been very silent, and I just want to make you feel like you've been silent. I know that you have. I know you have a lot to say. So just hang in there, Nico and Jackson. But I just want to ask Mark one more question, because I think I saw this story. It's a really interesting story, just about the idea of like how fast a city can move to solve certain problems. There was a story of an unhoused man who was removed, like his encampment was removed from the Rogers Centre. Do you want to talk about how that particular problem was solved? Because it turns out a city can do a lot of things sometimes when you're trying to solve a problem.
Yeah. So there was a few unhoused people living in the park, Roundhouse Park, which is across the street from the Rogers Centre. And Christopher, the fellow you talk about, they've been living at the park since about November 1st, so the start of the month. So about 11 or 12 days, police had come a couple times to tell them to move, and they, by Christopher's account, they told them it's because Taylor Swift is coming. There's going to be a lot of foot traffic in this area. We talk about that 500,000 number. Police were telling them about that. And eventually the solution to this problem was that the city opened up space in its shelter system. Christopher, I've been speaking with them, and they are now staying in a hotel up by the 401. And that is a normal part of this city's shelter system. The city leases hotels to augment its shelter system. But it's one of these examples of when the world comes to town, this city can move mountains to get problems solved. Yeah,
I think it's a really good reminder that sometimes you can act a little bit with a little bit of urgency. Taylor Swift appears to be the reminder of that. Jackson, I want to give you space here to think about a little bit about like the idea of 500,000 people coming to this town, this being the motivation for it. I think now that you've seen the show, because I'm constantly on the show explaining why I think that is, I would like to hear your perspective on why you think that is. Why do you think 500,000 people would have traveled to see a show or be around the vibe of a show like the one yesterday?
I think she's a social touchstone. She's a cultural movement in a lot of ways. I mentioned that monoculture.
Yeah.
She is, akin to Elvis, akin to the Beatles, something that we all kind of gather around. But what is so remarkable about that right now is that should not be possible anymore. We have stratified media dissemination. We have algorithms choosing for us what we watch. We have the internet. When Elvis was on TV, everyone watched Elvis. When Seinfeld aired his last episode, it's all the same time for everybody. We stream things now. Swift has allowed people to come together to create a communal space in a way that stretches to so many different people in a way that is remarkable, unusual for now, something we don't get to experience that often. And it's a beautiful thing. It engenders so much feelings of community, but it also, I do understand why it's a little bit upsetting to others, because it is something that obliterates so many other artistic interests and artistic venues. And when it comes to a city, like we had those Rogers ads in the TTC when the tickets were sold out for like a year. Like you can't buy those. It's just kind of showcasing what the city is going to do. Gardner Expressway was like kind of shut down for a while. People that don't necessarily jump on board might be like, well, okay, she's good, but there are people that are more talented, more interesting, more pressing, more they do more for art that I don't understand why this face that is good but not the greatest ever is taking over all of society. So I do on the one hand understand why it feels so good to inhabit that space, but I also understand why the breadth and the huge nature of that space can maybe make people a little bit indignant.
Nico is among the indignant, I think. Maybe not indignant, but I think you are among the people who are like, you know what, for what this thing is, it takes up a lot more cultural space and conversation than maybe it should. So I want you to think about it from the other end, which is to say, what void is she filling that allows her to take up that much space, you think?
It's funny. I'm a hater and indignant, and I like to think of myself as sort of like a conscientious objector, but like, but I will take these terms. Like I think a void that she fills is like, it's interesting because over the last year, especially, I've been seeing a lot of people sort of positing this idea of like, where are women in, like the Billboard Top 100 is suddenly a stat that a lot of people seem to care about. And a couple of times this year, I've seen think pieces about like, where are women on the Billboard Top 100? Like they're everywhere, and they've kind of always been everywhere. Like pop music has not traditionally, but for a long time, it has been a women's media. And now more than ever, Taylor Swift being this large cultural movement that has also like brought in, so many other fandoms, right? Like look at Gaylor's for a prime example of like a lot of queer people finding themselves in Taylor Swift songs where they're not necessarily really written, but because look, queer people don't get a lot of opportunities to see massively famous people that sort of speak for them or speak to them in a way. So, like it does sort of bring these things. I think for a long time, we think of dominant cultural movements as being a thing for, for men or whatever. And it's really the void that she's filling is proving that in actual fact, a lot of the audiences, a lot of the people that drive these movements have never really been men. It has always been, like people with passion. It just so happens that a lot of that happens to be women. A lot of that happens to be queer people. A lot of that happens to be all these disparate communities that don't see themselves reflected in these other cultural movements that we always deem to be dominant. That is, sports and rock music and all of these other things that also always have women and queer people in them, but they are suppressed, and here is a thing of like, suppression is not a factor in Taylor Swift. If there's one thing you can say about the Taylor Swift movement is suppression does not come into play. This is very much a buoyant industry, and I think where people sort of bristle against it is this exact thing of like feeling that they're at odds with it, when in actual fact, they're more than welcome there. They choose to not be there. Like I am a skeptic of it because it's not always for me, but I choose to put myself in that position. I also totally understand being on the inside, right? And like that is the narrow line you walk.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the inside on the Bruce Springsteen fandom. You know what I mean? So like you can't be on the inside of every single fandom, Nico. That's not possible.
Right.
It's not possible.
I think there's also just anxiety that happens when you see everyone else get excited about something that is popular and you don't quite understand it. And a lot of people turn that anxiety into immediate dismissal just so they're comfortable with their anxiety about it versus genuine inquiry into why do so many people like this extremely popular thing.
Yeah. You need to give that anxiety a blade. I've been reading a lot of people on Reddit especially in Toronto Reddit, wondering why is the city doing this? Because they don't understand. And exactly that. They turn their anxiety around not feeling included into a weapon that they can wield against it. Because when you don't understand, you attack. And it's easier to attack than it is to try to critique from a place of understanding or even try to understand.
But I will also say though, can I just really quickly say,
we don't have the time. That's also why we have a podcast. So we're going to keep this conversation going because we're obviously and very clearly not done. So I'm going to say Nico Stratus is here, Jackson Reaver is here, and Jess Meat is here, and Mark Colley is here, and we're going to keep this conversation going. We're not going to stop right now, but we are going to say goodbye to our radio audience, and we're going to keep the conversation going. If people want to listen to the rest of this episode, they can find it wherever they get their podcasts. This show is called Commotion. My name is Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. We are obviously not done talking about Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour, so we're going to keep the conversation going. But in the meantime, if you're listening on the radio, we're going to say goodbye to you, and we'll see you next week.